In the name of God, by whose descent among us the worlds are reconciled. This morning I give thanks to three teachers of mine, Father Richard WIlbur in high school, and college professors Wyatt McGaffey and Sandra Berwind. They were, all three of them, severe taskmasters, like I am not as a teacher. They taught me how to write. They also had us learn a few poems, which have helped me over the years make sense of my own spiritual life. Polo and Berwind assigned both of them The Journey of the Magi by T.S. Eliot. It is set in ancient Persia or some such place, and the old wise man is talking to his students, and they seem to have notebooks and pens, and the old man is telling them his most important story.
A cold coming we had of it. Just the worst time of the year for a journey. And such a long journey. The ways deep and the weather sharp. The very dead of winter. And the camels galled, sore-footed, refractory, lying down in the melting snow. There were times we regretted the summer palaces on slopes, the terraces, and the silken girls bringing sherbet. Then the camel men, cursing and grumbling and running away and wanting their liquor and women, and the night fires going out on the lack of shelters, and the cities hostile, and the towns unfriendly, and the villages dirty, and charging high prices. A hard time we had of it. At the end, we preferred to travel all night, sleeping in snatches, with the voices ringing in our ears that this was all folly. Then at dawn, we came down to a temperate valley, wet below the snow line, smelling of vegetation, with a running stream and a watermill beating the darkness, and 3 trees on a low sky, and an old white horse galloped away in the meadow. Then we came to a tavern with vine leaves over the lintel, 6 hands at an open door, dicing for pieces of silver, and feet kicking the empty wineskins. But there was no information. And so we continued, and arrived at evening, not a moment too soon, finding the place. It was, you may say, satisfactory. All this was a long time ago, I remember. And I would do it again. But set down this. Were we led all that way for birth or death? There was a birth, certainly. We had evidence, and no doubt. I had seen birth and death, but had thought they were different. This birth was hard and bitter agony for us, like death. Our death. We returned to our places, these kingdoms, but no longer at ease here in the old dispensation, with an alien people clutching their gods. I should be glad of another death.
They offered gifts fit for a king, but they must have wondered why a king should be in a barn and not a palace, why there were no nursemaids or chamberlains, no ladies in waiting, no scribes recording the tribute or treasurers locking the gifts up for safekeeping. Write this down, he told his students. The gods who moved the stars, they wanted us to see something. We thought it would be a king. We were wrong. It was the most important thing we've ever done, but when we got back home, it wasn't home anymore. I am so alone. I don't get these people. I don't even like them. I have nothing to live for. Maybe he learned that the gods prefer something else than gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The kings are insecure, sitting in their terraces, tasting, maybe nibbling at their sherbet, made with the mountain snow and fruits from the temperate valley. Maybe he learned that the trees on the low sky were ill omens and the baby was doomed. Honestly, I think if I'd been there, if I was listening to the old man, I'd want to cheer him up, distract him from such gloomy thoughts. Sir, you're being too hard on yourself. Who knows what that baby might have grown up to be? Okay, probably not a king, but something good, something important. This year, we have seen everything through the lens of COVID, of racial injustice and the increase of cruelty in public life. Every letter from my boss, every sermon, every podcast reminds us that 2020 is a magnifying glass and something is about to catch fire, if it isn't already blazing. Things are bad, and the forces of selfishness are massing like a malignant army. I know that today is technically 2021, but this has been a dreadful year. Lisa reminded us on Christmas Eve that the incarnation, the birth of Christ in such a humble place, it's God's reminder that we're never alone, that at the center of our story is joy. Not a good mood or a stretch of decent days of feeling pretty chipper. That's not what joy is. She quoted the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu saying that joy is not the goal, it's a byproduct. When you know you're loved and when you love others like that, then you get joy. The big story of Christianity is that God loved the world enough to step outside of eternity and into time and live for 33 years in time and space to show anyone who wanted to learn what love looked like. So his students wrote down our wise man's sayings. They thought his sad and distracted manner might have meant that fewer students would come and seek him out. But he still studied the stars. He still probably told people what the best day was going to be for their wedding or maybe for a military campaign. But the secret they found when the star stopped still made no sense. The gifts were inappropriate, and they must have worried that they inadvertently even caused that poor baby's murder, if the angel in the dream had been right, that Herod was out to worship him. And what were they supposed to have done? Settle in Nazareth and watch this little carpenter's son, see what happens? Did he really become king? No, they had to go home. Their eyes had been opened just enough to see the futility of the little bubbles of comfort and education that they knew only too well. Of course, we know how the story turns out. We know about Jesus' sermons about love and his tantrum in the shopping mall outside the temple. We know he grew up to embrace children and angrily rebuke religious hypocrites. We know they killed him. We know somehow he came back and many people saw him. We know the harder the empire tried to erase his story from history, the more people came to trust that he really had been some kind of an incarnation of God, worthy of a star and angels, and even a visit from 3 foreigners who would never figure it out. Happiness is not the point of Christmas. Joy is the point, even if joy is not necessarily always happy. It's way more important than that. In fact, my most important spiritual moments, when I've known that God's indomitable love is real, despite all the forces of fear, in those most important moments, I cried my eyes out and I shook with sobbing, with gratitude. So I'll close with one more poem. Never fails to bring me to that severe, tearful, joyful place. Chad chose my favorite hymn to begin our service today, and you might have therefore sung it already, but listen to it now. It's every bit as melancholy as our poem about the Magi, and maybe that's why I trust it. There's something about sad music that just seems more true. I don't know. I don't know any more accurate explanation either for what Christianity means and for my own being a follower of Christ than this hymn, based on a Christmas poem by the former American poet laureate Richard WIlbur and composed by David Hurd. It's called "A Stable Lamp is Lighted." So here's my Christmas wish. May you know deep down how much you are loved, and accept that gifts with tears if you're like me, or dancing, or laughter, or fierce resolution, or all of the above. Happy Christmas.